Pontius Pilate is said to have written a letter to Emperor Tiberius, detailing the life of Jesus, his miracles, trial, crucifixion, and resurrection. The letter includes a vivid description of Jesus' physical appearance, which is not found in the Gospels. In the letter attributed to Pontius Pilate, there is a meticulous description of Jesus' physical appearance, something that does not appear in the Gospels. This passage is of great interest because it seeks to offer a detailed and unique image of Jesus, as if it were intended for someone who could recognize him physically. Here are the main points highlighted in the description. Jesus is described as a man of relatively tall stature, with a reverent presence that is imposing and inspiring both love and respect. His physical figure was harmonious, and his posture conveyed dignity. Jesus' hair was described as having the color of ripe chestnut, straight to the ears, and then more wavy, falling over his shoulders. There was a natural parting in the middle of his hair, as was common among the Nazarenes. His beard was thick, but not very long, with a forked shape and the same color as his hair. Jesus' face was without blemishes or wrinkles, considered embellished by a slightly reddish tone. His nose and mouth were described as proportionate and impeccable, without anything that could be criticized. This description paints a portrait of a man whose appearance was attractive, but at the same time modest and dignified. His eyes were gray, clear, and quick to reprove, conveying a combination of innocence and maturity. He was described as someone who rarely laughed, but was often seen crying, indicating a deep emotional sensitivity. In his way of speaking, Jesus was tempered, modest, and wise. He balanced gravity and gentleness in his conversations, demonstrating a personality that blended authority and accessibility. Pilate ends the physical description with a remarkable statement. Jesus, due to his singular beauty, surpassed the sons of men. This reference highlights an almost divine characteristic, as if Jesus' appearance transcended the common standards of the time. This description, according to the text, seems to have been written with great care, possibly to convey to the readers of the time a vivid image of who Jesus was, since there were no devices to capture images. However, there are debates about the authenticity of these details, especially with regard to the coloring of the hair and beard, which could have been altered by copyists over time. Even so, this passage offers a unique and intriguing view of how Jesus might have been perceived physically. In addition to the physical description of Jesus, the letter attributed to Pontius Pilate highlights emotional and behavioral characteristics that reveal striking traits of his personality and conduct. These details add depth to the figure of Jesus, showing how he related to others and how his presence was perceived. Here is a detailed analysis. Jesus is described as someone who rarely laughed, but often cried. This suggests an introspective and compassionate nature, marked by a deep emotional connection with human suffering. Our rarity of laughter. The absence of laughter can be interpreted as a reflection of his serious mission and his focus on spiritual and human issues. Frequent tears. The tears indicate empathy and a unique sensitivity to the problems and pains around him, reinforcing the image of a spiritual leader concerned with the well-being of people. His eyes, described as gray and clear, had an impressive ability to convey reproof without the need for words. Quick to reprove. This ability to communicate disapproval with just a look demonstrates a natural authority and the ability to correct without being aggressive. Friendly and serious look. Despite this, his eyes also conveyed innocence and maturity, creating a balance that inspired both respect and confidence. Jesus was tempered, modest, and wise in his way of speaking. He not only said what was necessary, but also knew how to say it, blending gentleness with firmness. His speech was a mixture of courtesy and gravity, allowing his words to be accessible to the simplest but profound for the most learned. In his actions and words, Jesus demonstrated an authority that went beyond physical appearance. He was capable of inspiring both love and fear, indicating a strong and undeniable moral presence. He was terrible in admonishing. That is, his seriousness in correcting errors was powerful and impactful. At the same time, he was pleasant in conversation, showing a welcoming and human side that drew people close to him. The description suggests that Jesus was the epitome of balance between firmness and compassion, between authority and accessibility. His way of behaving and speaking was seen as exemplary, which explains why he attracted crowds and aroused respect, even from his opponents. The letter indicates that Jesus was able to captivate both the simple and the wise with his wisdom and charisma. His emotional and spiritual influence was so great that even Pilate, a Roman governor, felt compelled to describe him with admiration and respect. These emotional and behavioral aspects of Jesus reinforce the idea that he was not only admired for his words, but also for the way he lived them. He combined humility and wisdom with an emotionally strong presence, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who met him. This helps build a vision of Jesus as a profoundly human and, at the same time, divine figure. The letter attributed to Pontius Pilate presents a fascinating and deeply symbolic account of the events surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. These details are rich in spiritual and historical significance, offering a unique perspective on how the Roman governor perceived the events and their impact on the society of the time. Here is a detailed analysis. Pilate describes the crucifixion of Jesus as a central event that caused commotion and brought profound changes to the region. He mentions that he was pressured by religious leaders and the crowd to authorize the execution, highlighting the political and religious tension that permeated the decision. His attempt to wash his hands symbolizes not only a search for innocence, but also a recognition of the injustice of the act. The account mentions supernatural phenomena that accompanied Jesus' death, reinforcing the perception that something extraordinary had occurred. Darkness at noon. The sun darkened at the moment of the crucifixion, an event that would have caused fear and confusion among those present. Moon-like blood. The description of the red moon increases the symbolic weight of the occasion, often associated with judgment and divine wrath. Stars shining. During the day. This phenomenon illustrates the inversion of the natural order, highlighting the uniqueness of the moment. Pilate reports that the dead came out of their graves and appeared to many, an event of supernatural proportions. Spiritual impact. This phenomenon would have reinforced the belief in Jesus as the Son of God, even among those who previously doubted. Connection with the Scriptures. The resurrection of the dead echoes Jewish prophecies about the Messiah and the Day of Judgment, giving more credibility to the events in the eyes of those who expected divine signs. Pilate highlights that Jesus responded to the accusations with serenity and modesty, without any resistance, which differentiated him from other defendants. Jesus' statement, "My kingdom is not of this world," intrigued Pilate, revealing the spiritual nature of his mission and his disinterest in political ambitions. After witnessing the phenomena, Pilate describes how he was disturbed and sought to wash his hands of Jesus' blood, indicating a crisis of conscience. He acknowledges that he had never before judged someone like Jesus, whose presence and conduct had deeply marked him. Pilate expresses in his letter that the events of the crucifixion could alter the destiny of the nation. He relates the supernatural phenomena to the wrath of the gods, demonstrating concern about the spiritual and political impact of the event. The instability in Jerusalem and the fear of an insurrection also shaped his actions, showing how political decisions were intertwined with religious events. On the one hand, he tries to justify his decision as a political necessity, sacrificing Jesus to preserve peace in Jerusalem. On the other hand, he shows remorse, suggesting that he was aware that he had condemned an innocent man, recognizing the uniqueness of Jesus. The letter from Pontius Pilate to the Roman Emperor Tiberius brings one of the most detailed and curious accounts of the physical appearance of Jesus Christ. This description, which is not found in the canonical Gospels, offers a fascinating view of how Jesus might have been perceived by his contemporaries. Let's explore these details. Pilate describes Jesus as a man of tall stature and with an imposing presence. His posture is mentioned as being reverent, a combination that inspired both love and respect, as well as fear in those who observed him. These characteristics suggest a charismatic and distinct figure, someone who naturally attracted attention. Jesus' hair is described as having the color of ripe chestnuts, straight to the ears and then wavy, falling over his shoulders. He also had a dividing line in the middle of his head, in the style of the Nazarenes, a detail that reflects a concern with tradition and a possible link with religious practices. The beard is mentioned as being thick, the same color as the hair, not very long but slightly forked. His face is described as without blemishes or wrinkles, embellished by a delicate reddish tone. The nose and mouth are mentioned as perfectly proportioned, without anything that could be criticized. The description conveys the image of a man of singular and striking beauty, which was rare and notable for the time. His eyes are described as gray, clear and piercing, capable of conveying reproof or tenderness with intensity. Pilate mentions that Jesus was terrible when admonishing, but courteous and pleasant when speaking, demonstrating a balance between authority and accessibility. Jesus was rarely seen laughing, but often cried, a detail that reinforces his emotional connection with human suffering and his seriousness regarding his mission. His speech was always tempered, modest and wise, characteristics that attracted crowds and disarmed his opponents. Pilate observes that Jesus stood out significantly among the Jews of his time, both for his physical appearance and for his posture. He describes him as possessing a singular beauty that surpassed that of any other man, something that can be interpreted as a reflection of his divine essence. The description is so detailed that it raises debates about its authenticity. Some scholars suggest that it may have been embellished or modified over the centuries by scribes or copyists. However, the depth and specificity of the details indicate that the description may have a historical basis, especially considering the absence of technology to capture images at the time. Constant instability. Pilate describes Jerusalem as one of the most difficult cities to govern, due to its turbulent population and the constant threat of insurrections. Scarce resources. The Roman garrison in the region was insufficient, composed of only one centurion and a few soldiers. Pilate had requested reinforcements from the prefect of Syria, but received a negative response. Administrative challenges. The tension between the Romans and the Jewish religious leaders was constantly increasing, placing Pilate in a delicate position. Pilate did not see Jesus as a political threat. On the contrary, he considered him a friend of the Romans and noted his apolitical stance, which contrasted with other religious or revolutionary leaders. In his words, Jesus was a man who spoke with wisdom, and his message included a famous teaching: render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Despite the positive view that Pilate had of Jesus, the Jewish religious leaders saw him as a threat to their authority. The pressure increased with new accusations, and Pilate feared that his refusal to meet the demands of the religious leaders could incite a popular uprising. For Pilate, an uprising would be disastrous, as he did not have enough troops to control the situation. B. Pilate hesitated to condemn Jesus, recognizing his innocence. In his letter, he describes having washed his hands in public as a symbolic gesture to declare that the guilt did not fall on him. However, the fear of a major conflict led Pilate to give in. He chose to sacrifice Jesus to avoid an uprising and preserve peace in Jerusalem. This decision reveals Pilate's pragmatism, which placed political stability above justice, even while recognizing Jesus' innocence. Pilate's choice to sacrifice Jesus to preserve peace in Jerusalem is deeply ironic, given that Jesus is known as the Prince of Peace in the Christian tradition. By handing over Jesus, Pilate contributed to the fulfillment of his divine mission to offer himself as a sacrifice for humanity. The letter reflects the tension between the political and spiritual worlds, highlighting how human decisions, often guided by momentary interests, can serve greater purposes. Constant instability. Pilate describes Jerusalem as one of the most difficult cities to govern due to its turbulent population and the constant threat of insurrections. Scarce resources. The Roman garrison in the region was insufficient, composed of only one centurion and a few soldiers. Pilate had requested reinforcements from the prefect of Syria, but received a negative response. Administrative challenges. The tension between the Romans and the Jewish religious leaders was constantly increasing, placing Pilate in a delicate position. Pilate did not see Jesus as a political threat. On the contrary, he considered him a friend of the Romans and noted his apolitical stance, which contrasted with other religious or revolutionary leaders. In his words, Jesus was a man who spoke with wisdom, and his message included a famous teaching: render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Despite Pilate's positive view of Jesus, the Jewish religious leaders saw him as a threat to their authority. But pressure mounted with new accusations, and Pilate feared that his refusal to meet the demands of the religious leaders could incite a popular uprising. For Pilate, an uprising would be disastrous, as he did not have enough troops to control the situation. Pilate hesitated to condemn Jesus, recognizing his innocence. In his letter, he describes washing his hands in public as a symbolic gesture to declare that the guilt did not lie with him. However, the fear of a larger conflict led Pilate to give in. He chose to sacrifice Jesus to prevent an uprising and preserve peace in Jerusalem. This decision reveals Pilate's pragmatism, which placed political stability above justice, even while recognizing Jesus' innocence. Pilate's choice to sacrifice Jesus to preserve peace in Jerusalem is deeply ironic, given that Jesus is known as the Prince of Peace in the Christian tradition. By handing over Jesus, Pilate contributed to the fulfillment of his divine mission to offer himself as a sacrifice for humanity. The letter reflects the tension between the political and spiritual worlds, highlighting how human decisions, often guided by momentary interests, can serve greater purposes. Pontius Pilate's decision to hand Jesus over to be crucified was a milestone in history that revealed the political and strategic nature of his leadership. Despite finding no guilt in Jesus, Pilate yielded to pressure from the Jewish religious elite and the crowd demanding condemnation. This choice reflected not only the tension between Jews and Romans, but also the dilemma of a governor trying to maintain order in an unstable territory. The priests and religious leaders, motivated by envy and resentment, were determined to eliminate Jesus. For them, Jesus represented a threat to the traditional religious system and the authority they exercised over the people. Pilate was the target of numerous accusations and appeals from these leaders, who claimed that Jesus was inciting revolts against Rome and violating Jewish law. Pilate tried to release Jesus by offering the choice between him and Barabbas, a notorious criminal. Surprisingly, the people chose Barabbas, demonstrating how the masses can be influenced by charismatic leaders or political interests. By washing his hands, Pilate symbolically tried to disclaim responsibility, but the act revealed his weakness in resisting popular pressure. The decision to sacrifice Jesus was, first and foremost, a pragmatic choice to avoid a possible uprising in Jerusalem. Pilate knew that the city was in constant tension and that a riot could compromise his position and even attract the wrath of the Roman emperor. Jesus was used as a scapegoat, offering a temporary solution to calm the crowds and preserve public order. Pilate proved to be a pragmatic leader, more concerned with maintaining his authority and stability than seeking justice. For him, the life of one man, however just he may be, was not worth the risk of an insurrection that could destabilize Roman rule in Judea. This pragmatism, however, tarnished his reputation and made him a symbol of cowardice and opportunism throughout history. The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most emblematic events in Christian history, representing the culmination of his sacrifice for the redemption of humanity. This moment was not just a brutal physical death, but also an immeasurable emotional and spiritual suffering, where the weight of humanity's sin was placed upon him. Previous scourging. Before being crucified, Jesus was brutally flogged. The Roman scourging was a cruel process, where whips with pieces of metal and bone tore the flesh, leaving deep wounds. The crown of thorns. A crown of thorns was pressed onto his head, causing intense pain and humiliation. Carrying the cross. Jesus had to carry the heavy wooden beam to Golgotha, which aggravated his physical exhaustion. Along the way, he fell several times due to exhaustion. The crucifixion itself. Execution on the cross was one of the most painful and humiliating forms of capital punishment. Nailing the hands and feet was extremely painful, as it hit sensitive nerves. The position on the cross forced the victim to lift their body to breathe, causing continuous agony until death. The abandonment of the disciples. Many of his disciples fled after his arrest, leaving Jesus practically alone in his ordeal. Only John, Mary, and a few women were present at the time of the crucifixion. The mockery of the crowds. Throughout the process, Jesus was mocked. Roman soldiers, religious leaders, and even passers-by insulted him, saying, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself." Matthew 27:42, public humiliation. Being crucified in public, stripped naked and exposed to shame, was an attempt to completely dishonor him before everyone. The weight of sin. On the cross, Jesus carried the sin of all humanity. As Paul wrote, "He who knew no sin was made to be sin for us." 2 Corinthians 5:21. This act brought an unimaginable spiritual weight, as he became the perfect and definitive sacrifice to atone for the sins of the world. Separation from the Father. The most agonizing moment was when Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. This cry reveals the depth of his spiritual agony, as for the first time he experienced a momentary separation from the Father due to the sin he was carrying. The fulfillment of prophecies, the crucifixion was not an accident, but part of the divine plan of redemption. Isaiah 53 prophesied, "He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities." The vicarious sacrifice. Jesus died in place of humanity, taking upon himself the punishment that each person deserved for their sins. Victory over sin and death. Despite the extreme suffering, the cross became the symbol of hope, because it was through it that Jesus won salvation for all who believe. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. Even in the midst of pain, Jesus showed compassion for his tormentors. "It is finished," John 19:30. These final words mark the fulfillment of his redemptive mission, indicating that the sacrifice was complete and that the debt of sin had been paid. The crucifixion of Jesus was the apex of his suffering and, at the same time, the greatest act of love in history. He endured unimaginable physical pain, devastating emotional agony, and a spiritual burden that no one could bear. All of this to fulfill God's plan of redemption, reconciling humanity to himself. This event not only marked history but transformed lives, offering salvation to all who believe and reaffirming the power of sacrifice and God's unconditional love. The cross, which was a symbol of death and shame, became a symbol of life, hope, and eternal victory. For Christians, the crucifixion of Jesus was the fulfillment of a divine prophecy, essential for the redemption of humanity. Although Pilate acted with political intentions, his actions aligned with God's greater purpose, who used this human act to carry out his will. Jesus' sacrifice not only restored momentary peace in Jerusalem, but also brought the promise of eternal peace to those who believe in his message. Pontius Pilate, as Roman governor of Judea, faced a moral and political dilemma in dealing with the trial of Jesus. Despite finding no guilt worthy of death in Jesus, he hesitated to make a final decision, trying in various ways to avoid the crucifixion. This hesitation not only reveals a man aware of Jesus' innocence, but also a leader pressured by the social, religious, and political forces around him. Pilate publicly stated several times that he found no guilt in Jesus. "I find no basis for a charge against him," John 18:38. This conviction was reinforced by the way Jesus responded to the accusations with dignity and calm, without showing signs of rebellion. His perception of injustice was evident when, after questioning him, he tried to release Jesus to the people. Another element that increased his hesitation was his wife's dream, which warned him not to condemn Jesus. "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." Matthew 27:19. This detail demonstrates that even supernatural events seem to intervene to reinforce Jesus' innocence and warn Pilate about the gravity of his decision. Pilate tried to appeal to the compassion of the people, offering them the choice between releasing Jesus or Barabbas, a notorious criminal. To his surprise and frustration, the people, incited by religious leaders, chose Barabbas, clamoring for Jesus' crucifixion. This moment marked the defeat of his strategy, showing how crowds can be manipulated by influential leaders. Faced with the insistence of the people and the Jewish leadership, Pilate made the decision to wash his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." Matthew 27:24. This act symbolized his attempt to disclaim guilt, but also revealed his moral weakness and inability to resist pressure. Pilate knew that giving in to the demands of the religious leaders and the crowd was the safest way to avoid riots in Jerusalem. As governor, he faced constant tensions in a region known for its political and religious instability. His hesitation was not only moral, but strategic. He feared a possible negative report to Caesar if there was an insurrection. Despite his desire to save Jesus, Pilate became complicit in his condemnation by giving in to external pressures. His hesitation, paradoxically, served the divine purpose, as the crucifixion of Jesus was essential for humanity's plan of redemption. Even so, his name became associated with the unjust trial being mentioned in the Apostles' Creed, "Suffered under Pontius Pilate."